All right, welcome to the Badger Podcast. This is Wasabi Goat Research, and I am talking again today with Alex, the Entreprenerd. Alex, what's going on?
Thank you for having me, Wasabi.
So we were just talking about, before the podcast, what are the ones that have done a little bit better? What are the ones that have done worse? And surprise, surprise, the ones that have done better are the ones that have a clear benefit for you, dear viewer and listener. And with that in mind, I think we're probably talking about one of the most beneficial topics in all of DeFi, which is how not to get rugged, how not to lose your funds in a sketchy protocol. We've done some videos on this before, but that was from the perspective of kind of Sushi Swap and kind of like blue chip or very well-known and established and audited DeFi protocols. And now what's going on? Markets are down a little bit. Yields are going down a little bit. So a lot of people, if you're thinking similar to me, might be kind of going out the risk spectrum, looking for new, more degen farms, stablecoin farms, other chains, getting further out the risk curve. So we're going to talk about what to do if you're investigating a brand new protocol that you haven't used. Maybe it's just popped up, maybe you heard about it on Twitter, and we're going to go through some steps and look at kind of like the basic due diligence checks that you can do before putting funds into any DeFi protocol. So Alex, how does that sound? Where should we start?
Sounds awesome. I will start by saying that while we may give specific examples, none of this is an endorsement, and I personally and we both recommend you do your own due diligence on them before you ape. Ultimately, you have control of your keys, and as such, you are taking responsibility as to whatever you're doing. We're just going to show you how we think about this stuff when we approach these high risk. And ideally, I have a couple stories of how I lost considerable amounts of money, and maybe Wasabi, we can also share those. So stick around for some war stories as well.
All right, let's get started. So I don't know, one place that I look for stable farms is like Beefy Finance. So that's a yield aggregator that has a bunch of different farms on it, and you can kind of go shopping for the best yield. Is that where you even go? Like what? Like say you have, I don't know, 100K of stable coins sitting around somewhere, and you want to try to get a nice juicy yield. Where would you go to start looking for these opportunities?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. So I would start by saying that it depends why you got those stables. So let's say you have them for tax purposes. Maybe you're saving them because you need to pay taxes, or maybe they're just your safe stash or whatever, which will be kind of arguable because of the current inflationary environment we're in. But let's assume you do have that stock, and it's for purely for investment purposes, perhaps low risk. The usual alpha used to be a mixture of Twitter, where you will stalk different projects and different ecosystems. And then the second thing you will do will be using a tool such as VFAT, VFAT.tools, or you would use rugdoc.io, which are basically aggregators. I know there's a bunch more. I think DAppRaider is another one. But for my experience, once you start getting into too many mainstream tools, just as the risk gives you more reward, so the risk of losing all your money gives you more reward of making a lot more. In the same way, a more widespread tool that is used by too many people means that the APY is just going to be low. And the best example would be something like Geist. We saw Geist late last year go from maybe literally 1,000% APY because Aave open sourced their backend code, their Solidity code, as well as their front end code, their website. And he literally had 1,000% APY, but that lasted maybe one day, and then people realized that half of the rewards were vested, and so basically some people ended up regretting aping a little too fast, which is kind of the message of the story. At the end of the day, is you may sometimes regret your not winning enough. That's something that happens. But most people, just like in gambling, they will tell you about their losses, because those really hurt a lot more than you know, not getting 1,000% APY for 7 hours or something like that. So ultimately, I think our message is going to be a message of cautiousness and thoroughness. You really risk nothing in learning a little bit about the protocols before you use them, and but you have a lot to lose if you don't, because we'll go through some examples and we'll see. Either way, when I look at this stuff, I'm not sure if it's alpha anymore, but the first thing you can look into will be folding, The idea that if you go and deposit on a lending protocol, you can also borrow again through the credit generated, and then you can continue to deposit and do that for a while. And so you can look at the Phantom APY here. Through quick math, that sounds like a 7% deposit and a 6% borrow. So you're making money even on your borrows. So there's maybe like a 40-50% APY there if you look at that. And so if I already lost you as the viewer because you don't know what folding is, that's probably a good idea, is to really go through the basics of yield farming. We do have a video on farming on WBTC where we speak about these basics. But ultimately, the three basics are you're either farming the interest. So in this case, this is a lending protocol. Some people are borrowing because they're going short or they're levering up. So that's the why you get paid. That's one way. The second one is called liquidity incentives, which will be the second bar. You see the APR with the green Geist icon. That's the liquidity mining. And then the third option will be fees for trading. Because this is a lending protocol, there are no fees for trading. The fees are for lending. So that doesn't apply. But basically, that gives you an idea of the real sources of yield that you can get in DeFi. And so in 10 seconds, we went through Geist. Why is Geist safe, I guess? And we can show the specific due diligence if you want, Wasabi. But ultimately, something like Geist is safe because what the developer did is they copy pasted or forked. That's the terminology. But every time I say fork, if you don't know what forking means, you can just imagine copy pasting the code. The code is being reused exactly as it was written in Aave. And because Aave has been on mainnet for basically 2 years without any major exploit, it had only one economic attack that wasn't even performed. So technically, with zero exploits and with proper due diligence and with the proper collateral, it had zero risk ultimately, or very low risk, only perhaps the math may be a little wrong, but ultimately the protocol worked seamlessly in during downtimes, uptimes, etc. And so ultimately, because of the safety in that protocol, and because of the fact that this code wasn't tampered with, where tampered with is an important keyword, that's how you find rugs, is because people take something that is familiar and then they change it a little bit, they tamper it. But because Geist wasn't tampered, Geist is safe, completely safe to use. And because it's a little more difficult to go on Phantom, do the looping, go through the math, deal with the tokenomic of Geist, then you could have a rational explanation as to why something like Aave on Avalanche perhaps offers maybe 3-5% on the native token, while something like Geist is offering effectively almost 7% on the base deposit and almost 50% on a looped deposit.
So maybe we could get into that. So in a earlier episode, we talked about finding, being able to know that, okay, so Geist is a fork of Aave, and so we know if Aave is good, then Geist is good. But how do we know that there wasn't a little tweak made to insert a rug pull? So can we get into the actual comparing the code and make sure that they are, that this is like a 100% exact copy of the code?
Yeah, and that's personally what I did when I found about Geist. We'll go over the steps. Before we do so, my first warning is this: is that ultimately DeFi is about trust, and ideally the lack of trust. Where in Bitcoin, the motto is "Don't trust, verify." And so what we're going to show you next is the act of verifying. Anytime you trust, even if you trust us, you are basically giving away your only power, which is your ability to have thoughts, to think. And so if you stop thinking, that's the baseline guarantee of you opening up to exploits, risk, rugs, etc. So ultimately, think, Mark, think. Just use your brain. There's always two ways to dig deep into the code. One option is to find the documentation, and the other one is to force it. Let's show the soft approach. Let's see if there's the docs in the more option of the menu, most likely. Blah, blah, blah. And again, FAQ, we don't see anything. So let's scroll to the bottom of the website, see if there's developer docs, GitHub, something like that at the bottom. We don't see anything. So, I can Google Geist or whatever. But my advice, once you are at that point where you don't find, I guess you found them through Google.
Hmm.
What I would have done, but let's continue this docs thing, and then I'll show you the alternative. Ultimately, you will try to understand what's going on, and you will try to really see how the code was tampered. So let's scroll down to the bottom left. If you read it over, it will say that it's a fork of Aave eventually. So that is known, as you can see, DeFi protocol Aave. So let's scroll on the left side and see if we have anything else, any address or whatever. Seems like useful info, deployment addresses. There you go. And then you have an audit, and then you have multisig and time lock. So let's assume you are not a developer at all, right?
Mm-hmm.
What the Wasabi do that is really useful here for the non-developer viewer is they found the docs, right? You can always use Google, you can always use Twitter. You don't need to be a developer for that. You can always search for stuff, and then when you find it, now you actually have an option that is a fairly good option, which would be the audit section, right? That sounds like a pretty decent idea to go and check the audit. So we have the preliminary audit and the additional audit. So again, this is going to be controversial. The audit was done by Solidity Finance. I believe Solidity Finance basically only does sidechain reviews and audits. So I wouldn't give them, blue chip audit review status. Do your own research based on the protocols you use. You would have a different opinion than me. But at the same time, we can also just check the due diligence that was done. So let's see what we got. Blah blah blah. This is just some comments. Master Chef, user stake. So this shows the use cases of the contract. Let's continue going forward. This is ultimately just telling you what is going on here. I wouldn't necessarily trust this. Let's go and see the external threat. Continue scrolling down. Because basically this doesn't even look like an audit, if I gotta be completely honest. We can show an audit that we got from QuantStamp for our vaults and show what an actual audit looks like versus what this is. But let's continue scrolling down and give them the benefit of the doubt. Ultimately, we have function graph, inheritance chart. So this is all stuff that you can why as a developer I'm a little disappointed, because function graph, inheritance chart, this is stuff that you can generate automatically. You don't need a human being to do that. So there is no real added value in having that. And then we have some basic checks, such as checking for suicide, checking for unchecked ret val, user supply assertion. I'm not super sure what those all of that stuff means, because it really is like the example we gave about math. This is making statements about the code without proving them, and ultimately, we want to verify, not trust. So yeah, I wouldn't consider this as a good audit at all. It ultimately is just telling what the code is intended to do versus what the code should do, or what it actually does, because there's no invariant testing, there's no proof by induction, there's no breaking of properties, there's no automated testing. So ultimately, I wouldn't necessarily trust this. So let's go back to the other audit. I think there was a second one. Let's again, maybe the audit is enough. We got the Peck Shield additional audit. So let's go and check that out. Peck Shield, we will put it as the on the second tier. Let's say if there's an S tier for QuantStamp Trail of Bits, Peck Shield, we could put it on the A tier. As far as I'm aware, they do really good due diligence. And they also have an amazing Twitter. If you're interested, they do reports on flash loans and exploits. So we'll give them some additional benefits. And this is what a actual audit looks like, right? You have a PDF, in the introduction. There's typically like a disclosure, something like, if we didn't find something, it's not our fault. That's you always need that stuff, the
Mm-hmm.
lawyer stuff. And then after that, you would have the methodology that shows you what it means, like an explanation to what a high vulnerability or critical is. And then it actually shows you what they checked for. This is a list of stuff they checked for. And then lastly, we show you what they found. And so a audit is more like a list of findings, a list of things that the auditor, which you can imagine like an archaeologist, is trying to dig into the dirt to find something, some bone, and whatever bone they found, they report that's a lot closer to what an audit is. It's just finding the treasury or the bone for the bugs. So let's see what we got. This is the summary. This is something that you visually can understand. Let's have you scroll up a little bit. Sorry, the table number one, this one. right? You see that you have a list of findings. You have 2 medium severity findings, 4 low severity findings, and then you have informational and undetermined. Undetermined may be terrible or maybe insignificant. Informational means that it's most likely something about recovering some information. It really doesn't matter. Low means that there may be some small tweak, something like a rounding error. Perhaps you don't get enough of an interest, or you get a little too much. And medium, when you think about medium, that's when things can go wrong. Something like a denial of service, or it could be a stealing of excess value. Perhaps again, reliably getting the interest sent somewhere else. And then high and critical, that's when you can actually bring the protocol down, break the invariance. And critical means that you can just press a button and steal all the money. That's basically what critical means. So this table already, without any developer knowledge, should already give you some confidence around the code. We still haven't established the connection with Aave, but that means that some of the findings are not particularly scary. Let's continue with the research. Let's scroll down. Right, so this is now the list of the findings. So let's read them real fast. Proper answer type in Chainlink response, improved Oracle status in price fetch price. Then you have inconsistent use of incentive control and handle action. And lastly, ERC compliance of Geist token. We may need to check that one. Then you have fork resistant domain separator in a token, which is medium. So basically, the medium findings, right, are the fork resistant domain separator and the trust issue of admin keys. So let's think about what Geist is, though, before to put them in context, because I feel like we can give them some benefit here. On one end, Geist is like a new team, so there is always a degree of trust. So the mention of trust issues of admin keys is really important. So that's the one thing we really want to watch, because ultimately, if you trust the developer, that's where you went wrong. You shouldn't trust the developer, you should trust the code. And then the second thing is the fork resistant domain separator. Geist is a fork on Phantom. So why would we care if it breaks on a different domain, different side chain or layer twos or chain on Ethereum, for example? So that one, when you find such a medium severity finding, which is correct to be medium, but ultimately for the context, it may actually mean that it's a nothing burger. It doesn't matter. And everything else seems to do with oracles. And when it comes to oracles, you know that you could get liquidated in these protocols. So those may actually have more importance than it was given here, the low severity. So you do want to perhaps check them, especially if you're like an arbitrageur and you really play all the lending protocols to maximize your yield, or to play different interest rates where you borrow on one and then deposit on the other just to get that extra percentage. So that may be where you really want to dig deeper, because any oracle is at the end of the day is a human setting, so there may be something there to be either exploited or used to your advantage. And then the other side is, can the admin rug? So I would say that PV8, the eighth finding, is probably one of the most important ones. And so I would recommend, well, after seeing this table, you have your own opinion. This is what I'm saying. I will definitely check the issues of the admin keys. I will look at the other medium finding to try and understand what's going on. And then if I'm interested in going the extra level, I would also check the Chainlink and the Oracle stuff, because perhaps that gives me an edge in how I play this protocol. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So let's do that real quick. And then again, we still haven't figured out if this is an actual Aave fork. At least I haven't shown proof. So let's scroll down and find the findings. I think you can click the names. Or you can scroll, that's okay. But ultimately, this is just checking if the answer is valid. So basically, the Chainlink Oracle is not properly validated here. That means that if the Oracle fails to report the proper data, the protocol would use it. So this, in a catastrophic event, this could actually be a terrible situation. So this can cause a lot of issues. It's the likelihood of it is pretty low. That's why it was categorized as low. There also seemed to be a discrepancy. Notice the answer member field is uint 256, not int. So there also may be the possibility that the Oracle returns a integer, while the interpretation of it is going to be as uint, which means that there may be some conversion that can cause issues. So I would say in like a doomsday scenario, this could cause problems, while in the most normal operation, it wouldn't. So if you're super concerned about volatility and liquidations, You may not want to be on Geist levered, especially. You may just want to be on single-sided deposits, because in a doomsday scenario where Chainlink reports the wrong number, Geist is just going to take it at face value. Just going to use that value and liquidate you. So that's what this means.
How do you get from that to so this is telling you these are the data types, right? So like
Yes.
there are certain in Solidity, there are certain encodings for to tell it what type of number to expect, right? And how it handles it. So, in my mind, like if it's giving you the wrong data type, that could cause either it's like a small rounding error, or if it's a very high number, then it completely is off, right? So you're saying like a doomsday scenario,
Yeah.
it could be the numbers could be wildly off, but like
It could be
usually
massively
it's kind of
off.
like a rounding issue, right?
So I'm not exactly familiar this time with how negative numbers are represented in Solidity. I know there's multiple standards, but the standard they teach in university is one where you have one byte for the first byte at the beginning to determine if it's positive or negative. So if that's the case, that it means that anytime we get a negative number, we will be getting like a ridiculously huge response, a huge price from the Oracle. And so you can imagine that that will be a very drastic scenario. From my experience, Chainlink has never reported a wrong number, as in it had issues with delays. It had issues with just the responsiveness of it, because it's ultimately a multi-step process. But I'm not aware of a time where Chainlink reported I guess it reported once on the compound exploit. So maybe I'm actually wrong. If you're extremely thorough about your due diligence, you probably would want to go and check every time Chainlink misreported, which I think I can recall only once it happened, and compound had the pretty severe consequences of liquidating a lot of people. And so basically, what this finding truly says is that because of the implementation of how Geist is coded, you are implicitly trusting Chainlink as well to never make a mistake. Because if Chainlink makes a mistake, because Geist is trusting them, you are trusting Chainlink as well, if that makes sense. You're basically, the code doesn't have enough checks to avoid a situation where if one of the two counterparties, Geist or Chainlink, make a mistake, you are gonna be the sucker here. So yeah, it's a pretty actual dire consequence. It's a very low likelihood. So I guess that's why it was classified as low. Thinking the more I think about it, the more perhaps as a judge, I work with Colorina as a judge, I would probably classify it as a medium severity, because again, it can have very drastic consequences. It's just the likelihood is not that high. But yeah, that's basically what this finding is, and you could read it over and really try and understand it with patience. Ultimately, it's really not about coding here. It's just if it gets the wrong data, it doesn't know what to do and it trusts it. What do you think is going to happen? That's basically what this uh, is. And this issue has been fixed. There you go. So that's the most important thing you want to do as an audit, right? The last line is status. The issue has been fixed out of this commit. So now all of our discussion is like, yeah, that could have happened, but it was mitigated. And so now the audit gives you some trust that the developer actually has fixed the problems, instead of just, finding the problems or whatever. Does that make sense?
It does. So I guess this chart is a representation of things that may have then later been fixed, right? This is like what they found, and then you want to go through and see like have they fixed each one of these things.
Yeah, I'm. Maybe I was a little distracted. Maybe more attentive viewer would have seen it. But typically, an audit has like a list of the findings and then resolved. There you go. That was the table. The second table. Scroll up a little bit.
Mm.
If you look on the right side, it has status resolved or confirmed. So that means that whatever was found was actually patched, and so that gives you extra confidence. You have to do an extra step, to be honest, and the extra step is that you have to verify that the developer deployed the code after the audit. Because if they fix the code on GitHub on their code repo, but they didn't update the code on the live version, then this audit is still useless, because the vulnerability is still inside the live code. Because smart contracts are immutable, you would have to check that. You would have to check if guys did redeploy or they did deploy after this audit, because in lack of a redeployment or an upgrade, the vulnerability will still be there, even if the report is saying that it has been resolved, because the report is just checking that it was resolved in the source code, not on the live smart contract.
Okay, so once we go through these, we're going to go and check when it was redeployed?
I mean, ideally, we would what we will do is we will go through the repo, we will compile the contract, and then compare the bytecode against the ones that is live. A alternative solution that is probably the one that I see as more realistic would be to go through their smart contracts, compare them with the Aave smart contracts and the Aave setup, and then see if they were tampered or they were changed. Which is more of a ballpark approach. There probably is an automated tool to do that. I'm not super familiar with it. And as far as I remember, my main goal in figuring out if Geist was safe or not was simply to prove that they didn't change anything on the landing pool code, on the A token code, and then just checking how the oracles were set up, because the oracles are ultimately the part where it is a configuration base. It means is the developer competent enough to set them up properly? While everything else, if you just copy paste it, you can't mess it up, if that makes sense. So, but basically, that's what you will do. If you can't code or you don't want to, you will just go through the audit and read it. Maybe it took us 20 minutes to do this. But ultimately, these 20 minutes, I feel like it gave us a lot of information. And in doing so, they give you a lot more power. Now you know how to relate to the protocol a little bit better. No?
What's the next step here? We're going to go in and go through how to check if this Geist code is the same as Aave.
Yeah, we're gonna let's try and ballpark that. So let's go back to the documentation for Geist.
Actually, before we finish the audit, can you just go back through what is kind of like the hierarchy of these audit firms? Like, what are you mentioned it briefly, but like, which are the ones that are kind of gold standard? Are there ones that are like sketchy that if this is kind of like not one to put a lot of confidence in?
Okay. Yeah, and in saying this, we basically go from fact, because we can argue about the code, to opinion. So take this with a grain of salt. I'm not omniscient. I do not read every single report from every single audit firm from every single thing. But this is just my opinion through watching mainnet evolve, watching Polygon evolve, watching Phantom evolve, watching Avalanche evolve, watching all of them, basically being there before they had liquidity incentives and seeing what happened, and the kind of the land grab opportunity that some of these auditing firm had. So ultimately, my perception is that there's basically one that is at the top of everything, and it will be formal verification, which is something that most protocols will never do. Only very few protocols do, and I believe Aave did, and that's offered basically by Certora. So Certora will be the only auditing firm that is not even an audit. It's like something better. It's called formal verification, and it basically means logical proof that the protocol actually works the way it's intended. Mm-hmm. Because what they do is they take what you saw from the solidity.finance messages, like just a bunch of messages or ideas about what the code does. They actually tokenize them into some weird logical language, and they can prove every single statement mathematically in a way where they literally can't find a counterexample to break it. And so that's called invariant testing, and that's the top of the top in terms of security. So if you can find a formal verification, and the true example I got is Aave and the DAI system, the MakerDAO DAI system. Those two have been formally verified, and so those provide extra security guarantees compared to a normal audit. And then in terms of top tier, I would say that QuantStamp is top tier, and then Trail of Bits is also top tier. I believe those two are by far the best. The reason why is kind of anecdotal, but it's because the best protocols use them. Let's say Compound, when it was born, use them. Synthetics, when it was born, use them. Aave, when it was born, use them. Every single protocol that came out of nowhere and basically made this space has worked with them. And then the other side is the researcher actually is smart enough, charismatic enough that if you go on Twitter and if you just stalk their takes, these people actually have very interesting opinions, and they're typically very well educated and super smart. So it's a mixture between track record and by the way, I'll break the track record in a second, providing a counterexample to have, again, to form your own opinion. But basically, those two are the top firms. And then you have mostly other firms. I would say Pack Shield, Maybe Certic you will put on like a second level, B tier, and then I think everything else goes on like a third tier. I think Solidity of Finance. What I saw there is not even considerable as an audit, to be honest. You could argue as like a peer, not even a peer review. There's no code, so I don't know exactly what that was. But yeah, I wouldn't trust something like that because it basically isn't proving anything. It's just making statements without proving them, and that's called marketing. That's not called audits, you know. So the day I see a great audit by Solitude of Finance, I'll give them credit, but this is not one of them. While the Pack Shield, you can see that was a lot closer to something formal, something with lists, something that shows patches, and something that show how the code was broken and how it was fixed, which is what an audit is, if that makes sense.
So another question for you. So you talked about, okay, Aave, Curve. These are protocols that have basically well audited, trusted code. What is the other protocols on that list? Like, what are protocols that if you saw a fork popping up on a sidechain, you'd know that, okay, these are ones that if we assume that the code is the same, then it's probably pretty safe.
Yeah, I mean, the entire rugdoc.io business was born out of the fact that we had Goose.finance, and Goose.finance basically would create these staking contracts, which I believe were always master chefs, and then the master chef will be claimable for further rewards. So anytime you had that kind of setup where even the UI was the same, and I'm not sure if you remember, but there was Polyfox, Polywhale, and there was another one I forgot, but basically they were all Goose forks, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which you can recognize if you want to go on Goose.finance or DinoSwap. They basically always have the same UI because there's the menu on the left with the price of the token, and then in the center you have like these staking contracts. And so I guess Goose is selling or whatever. It's already gone. Good old Goose. Never forget. Thank you for your contribution, I guess. But basically, yeah, there it is, the Goose.finance UI, right? Token on the left, Haken. Again, I would put it lower tier, and then Certic. We can give them a little bit more credit, consider their work ethic. But yeah, basically, you would have this kind of farms where, I mean, there's two sides to what the farm is, but ultimately, as a user, the first thing you want to verify is if this is a master chef, and typically it is. And so when it comes to what a master chef is, it's just a contract that receives a deposit, and then given a deposit, it calculates a bunch of rewards, and that's really all there is to it. There's nothing special about it. And so when you want to verify the master chef, you just want to verify that the code was literally just copy pasted. And so the way you will do that is you will go on the verified contract, you will copy it on a text editor, and then you would just compare it against the one from Sushi, which you can find in the Sushi docs when you search for MasterChef, I believe MasterChef V2. And so there's the other side of the story, which I feel like when talking about getting rugged, it's really important, is the fact that if you don't do the due diligence of what the master chef is and how it's written, there should be dev docs in the top left to get the actual code. But basically, you can get the Sushi MasterChef source, and then you want to understand why would this even exist, right? What's the point of the MasterChef? The point of the MasterChef was to vampire attack Uniswap by getting people to provide liquidity on a copy paste on a fork of Uniswap, and then incentivize them through this inflationary token called Sushi. That was the point of the MasterChef. And so when you're playing a game like Goose, why would you be staking with them? And typically the answer is because you want to get more Goose fast to sell it. And so this is basically the first iteration of the MasterChef Ponzinomics. It really is just a zero-sum game. I don't see any way to redeem it under my eyes. I'm not telling you not to do it. I'm just telling you to understand what's going on. But ultimately, this type of farms, which is like the second generation of yield farming, that's what they used to be marketed as they basically are based on the idea that you just stake your token and you pay a fee when you deposit, And so the fee that you're paying is basically paying the developers for letting you play the game. It's just like a ticket to enter. And then so that's how the developer made their money. And then the token itself just infinitely mintable, and eventually will always go to zero. And so every single one of these farms that look like this and that had this idea had a token that spikes up in price and eventually goes to zero. And so really the only game here is just finding them fast and being first and exiting early, because ultimately you are dumping on other people. And there's no redeemable property about this. It just really is just a uh, fool's game brought to this, and it was extremely popular last year. Up until it got replaced by more complicated tokenomics games that are based on bootstrapping funds for the developers with the goal of building something, versus what this is, which is more of a finished product, right? Because Goose is really a finished product. It's a product that is ultimately just a token that goes to zero and people farming it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think I guess the one counterexample in my mind would be like WeVE, which was they used a contract like this because Andre announced that they're doing this NFT distribution for Solidly, and then they basically created a MasterChef contract, and the only purpose was to get a high TVL for a short period of time to win this contest to get the NFT, right? So they basically created a farm like this just for the purpose of Flash getting TVL.
Yeah, and
which allowed them to win the NFT, and then now they're gonna use it to create value for the token holders. But yeah, like other than that, like yeah, I think definitely once
but
you
we gotta give it value there, in the sense that once you put that context that there is a specific goal, then we want to look at the, let's call it the infinite token, the WeV. It's basically fractionalized ownership over the NFT. That's how you can look at it. So for these cases where there is a tangible result, there always is a way to find an economic value, or at least an economic lower bound that gives you some rationality as to what the price, why the price looks like that, if that makes sense.
Yep, yeah, but if there's no underlying economic value being produced by the protocol, then the tokens.
It's ultimately a game people are playing. It's a PvP game. That's how we call it in crypto. It's just a PvP game where you are against other people in terms of extracting as much value as you can. But you're basically, it's a zero sum game where you're extracting from other people. And so I guess that's a good segue into sharing story of how I got, I guess, rugged in this way by the infamous Iron of Finance.
Oh,
And
you were in that
so
one.
yeah, like they should do like a second version of the crypto Degen. There's like a website, I think it's Ape Score. They give you your score.
Yep.
They really should do a second version, because the first version to me is really bullshit. Like you basically get points if you were in early Yearn or in Yam. It's like, bro, there's been so many new stuff that you deserve to have like battle scars for, and they should be recognized. And I think Iron was one, because Iron was the perfect example of bootstrapping an idea that in practice has never worked, which is an actually it has worked once. It's Fraxis, to be fair. We gotta give credit again. Fraxis is working, and it's a similar idea where you have an under collateralized stablecoin, which is made in part, its backing is in part composed of a stable asset. In the case of Iron, it was USDC, and then an unstable asset. In their case, it was the Titan token. I think it was like the Iron token. I think was called Titan at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so you would have like this farm, which you will find on VFAT. At the time, there was adamant.finance, which was another yield aggregator to find this type of opportunities. Because yeah, yield aggregators are a great way to discover. That's why Badger. There's value in just going on Badger.com and checking out what we are doing, because it gives you ideas, and then you can use them or not. But there's always the idea part where we have a DCA vault or a auto compounding vault or an emitting vault based on your just on your approach to the market. And so But yeah, like you would see like 1,000% APY. How can you resist 1,000% APY for weeks? For weeks, it was insane. It was crazy, 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 crazy. And so when you get to these really risky rewards, where ultimately it is like a magnified, magnified PvP game, where really the underlying value is dubious, and the only reason why it works is because there's positive buying pressure. That was why the protocol worked. There eventually is the time where these assumptions are tested, and if the underlying idea is not sound, in this case it was that the backing portion will be backed by selling more iron. The second that second side triggers, what happened to their contract is it started minting infinite iron. And so I remember I was doing an if global presentation over an hackathon, because I was literally live presenting, because I couldn't manage my position, I guess, quote unquote, manage my position,
Hmm.
which means exit as fast as humanly possible. But like it literally went to zero in like 3 or 4 hours, because the idea behind it was that it would mint more token to back itself, and so because it was failing in price, it basically minted itself to zero. So that's an example of like you getting rugged, but it's basically me rugging myself, because the code did what it's supposed to do. The logic was there. It's just my interpretation of that, and my greed overtake my rational senses, and ultimately it went to zero, and it literally went to zero, and it never came back. There was the second version, but ultimately never came back, because there's the two sides are, once people understand how it works, it never works. That's like the quantum physics of the market, I guess. And then the second side is the idea itself, or at least the execution of this undercollateralized stablecoin was not sound in its implementation, and so it just reliably failed under those conditions. And so the people that understood that, they rode the wave when it was up, and then they immediately exited. Maybe they had a bot to exit or whatever. And the people that didn't, they basically held something that looked valuable on paper, but ultimately was valueless, because it was just not a great execution of the idea.
Yeah, so that I guess that's getting to this like second category of rugs. Like there's the first category, which is like bugs in the code or admin exploits, and then there's just basically like if the underlying economics of the protocol are not sound, or they're depending on inflows or whatever, then it's basically just more of like a Ponzi collapse that is not, could be encoded in perfectly good code, but it's not good
Yeah, the
economics.
code is doing what it's supposed to, but ultimately you played yourself, and hopefully you can get battle scars, and avoid it happening again. So, but that's kind of I guess, my look at the space is like. I mean, I hope really there's no people that are like with wide-eyed dreamers that are getting their dreams stolen away. But I feel like most people in this space are just like jaded assholes that have battle scars and they can defend themselves, and so ultimately they don't need to be protected in any way, because it's we're I mean, the TikTok investors, I guess they need to be protected, but like people that actually understand what's going on, we don't care. Like we look at it from a more objective perspective, that it ultimately was an attempt to bootstrap funding for a new idea, and it promised a lot in order to get some flashy marketing and get some interest, and but the underlying execution was flawed, in that, again, the second the wind blew the other way, it just collapsed instantly. And it wasn't even collapsing because people dumped. Maybe we'll find one day that we got dumped on, but ultimately collapsed because literally the system was meant to mint more token when the price goes down. What do you expect that happens? It's like the goose idea time a million, because now the one time it goes down, it's just going to go down even faster, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, I wasn't in that one, but I was in the empty set dollar, dynamic set dollar, and then all the forks. Not all of them, but all the forks that came after that, there's similar, the same thing as like Ohm, and then all the Ohm forks, right? And then like the forks just collapse faster and faster once the main ones
Yeah.
had
Yeah, I
problems.
mean, and I think it's fair we do a talk on Om. I feel like Om has brought a lot of great ideas to this space. One of them will be, I guess, the actualization of a hedge fund, what is effectively an on-chain hedge fund where multi-sig manages funds. I find it hard to argue that it's not a hedge fund that manages funds, but that's one side. The other side will be the backing. I think the backing is a great idea, and I think it's a correct idea. As in, you have a bunch of token, you have a treasury. That's the actual value of the underlying. There's no need to be there's no sophistication about it. That's what it is. And so ultimately, if you believe that a group of anonymous people can get a better return on that portfolio than you, I think Om is the best place to park your money, to be honest, because as long as you have that opinion that other people can do better than you, why not? It makes a lot of sense. And then you have some amazing innovation in the bonds, which I feel like is actual innovation, as in the idea that you would bootstrap liquidity by offering a discount. And then in doing so, you're bootstrapping liquidity typically for your pool shoe or your protocol token or a pool for your protocol token. And in doing so, you're basically, the protocol is earning fees, which means that through this, basically the volatility of the bootstrapping process. So because there's a lot of interest when you launch, because typically the token can 1,000x or whatever, you're basically using that as a way to gain early fees, which are a way to again bootstrap a treasury so that you can actually build a company or build a DAO or build a project and have some treasury behind it. And so in that sense, it's not that different from what there's like a Kobe, as in I think we call it Kobe now, the app only guy,
Yep, crypto
that
Kobe.
deconstructs, crypto Kobe that deconstructs looks, right? The looks bootstrapping event, which is, I think it may actually be an amazing way to kind of fairly bootstrap a treasury. They ultimately had a bunch of looks token. The looks token entitles you, if staked, it entitles you to WEF trading fees. Every looks that was from the investors or from people that bought it was locked, so they couldn't stake it. So that the only looks that was stakeable was the one from the treasury, basically, so that the treasury could earn the majority of the trading fees that people were making. They were creating the volume to earn more looks, and so I feel like once you understand it objectively, they're ultimately buying the looks for their fees. There's nothing special about it. It's just a different dynamic. And so the important part about this stuff is understanding what is actually happening, and that you're basically either buying, like they say if you're the schmuck. I guess if you don't know who the fool in the room is, you are.
Mm.
It's the same thing in poker.
Yep.
And then the other side is you are always trading something. Like like there's no reinventing of entropy. Like entropy, as in the idea that energy can only be destroyed and cannot be created, and that over time chaos increases. Like that's what it is. It's the same thing in these economic systems. Ultimately, you have like the Big Bang, in the fact that there are a group of people that are super motivated. They're trying to build something new, and so there is that focus that comes from motivation, from people really trying to push themselves. And then ultimately it just collapses because people can't do it anymore because it's too much of a grind, or it's just too difficult, or the hopes were too high, or whatever. 99% of every project fails, just like every company fails, just like everything fails. And so you just want to understand why you are really doing it, because ultimately it kind of goes full circle in terms of, you could have just stood in stables and just chilled in stables or on Aave or whatever and do something a lot simpler, instead of going through the entire ups and downs of all these more complicated uh, ideas that ultimately they make it a lot more exciting, but they're just empty calories, just like potato, fried chips or whatever. They're just empty calories ultimately. Because again, you can't in a long enough term, you can't lie about true value. You just can't fabricate it. You can fabricate it only on the short term. So if you're like a swing trader, this stuff is really interesting. But if you're not, or if you don't want to, um, you may as well just really find something you're strong at and do that. And so in our case, going back to the security side, it's like, do you fully understand what's going on? And then are you sure that it's actually being executed the way that it was portrayed? Those are basically the two sides. You can do it through the code, you can do it through the audit, and then you're gonna do it through everything else, through marketing material, Twitter, the other people, etc.
All right, so we are coming up to about an hour here. I don't know if we have time to go and look through this code and make sure it's the same as Aave's. Like, I think that would be a very, while we have the video going, a very useful thing to go check to show someone how they can make sure that this is a true fork and hasn't been tampered with.
Yeah, let's do that. So let's go and go in the docs again, and then get a deployment address for one of the pools. So you see you got landing pool address. So first of all, if you're familiar with Aave, this is already something good because you're seeing names that are fairly familiar.
Mm-hmm.
Landing pool address provider registry, landing pool. So those are, and we gotta be sure we're on Aave v2 because Aave just went with v3. But Aave also has the development docs. And so that's something you can look into. This is v3 though. We need v2. Let's click on v2 contracts on the top left. Yeah. And then as you can see, address provider registry, a token. So the names are similar. So that's something positive. Let's go on Geist again. And let's get one of them. I guess let's go on the landing pool. Copy the address.
Landing pool,
0x,
this one, okay.
the third one, yeah. And you can always copy by just doing double click, by the way. That's a helpful life hack. And then you open the Explorer, which in this case will be FTM scan. And you paste the address, and you're going to go in the contract tab. It's green because it's verified, and you see that it has like immutable, blah, blah, blah. So this is the admin privilege that was mentioned in the audit. Ultimately, there is the ability to upgrade the contracts and to, so there is an added layer where you would need to verify that the admin is a time lock. But let's ignore that for now. Let's just see if the code was tampered. Let's go and read as proxy on the new tab, the 4 tab on the next to contract. You see that it has implementation contract. Open up implementation contract by clicking it. 0x free, blah, blah, blah. And now we have landing pool 0.76 version. So let's scroll down. Basically, let's see how the contract has been verified. But ultimately, this is a flattened version of the contract. So it means that it's all in one file. So now you basically have the landing pool contract for Geist. And so by a quick look, I mean, if you're super serious, you would have to actually read it line by line and find every time a token is moved. But by a quick look, it's fairly similar. So let me show you how you will get the Aave one, and then you will just compare them by using a diff tool, which you can find online pretty much anywhere. So let's go in the Aave documentation. Let's scroll down to probably addresses, scroll up a little bit. Keep scrolling. There you go. Deployed contracts, main market, blah, blah, blah. Let's go on main market. Let's get the landing pool, the third one, right? You have GitHub, but you also have the deployed. Let's go on contract. Let's go and see what we got here. Same idea, ABI of implementation contract. So click on the blue link.
What is ABI? That's the consolidated one?
ABI just means it's basically, how do I put it? It's basically the interface, as in it tells other programs such as JavaScript how to interact with it. Because it tells you what each function looks like and what are the parameters and the return values. So you would have a little bit of a struggle here because you have landing pool on the left from Aave, which is 79 files, and it's 79 separate files. And then you have the landing pool on the right on FTM scan, which is being inlined. That doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means you're going to require a little bit extra effort because you need to compare each file separately. But let's go on the landing pool on Aave. There's probably going to be a main contract. So let's scroll down a little bit. Keep scrolling down, not inside, but outside. We have 79 files, but there's going to be a file, something called like landingpool.sol. Keep going until you find it. Data types. These are all the components that make the contract. Keep scrolling down until you find the file called landing pool without the I at the top. This is the I landing pool, which will be the interface of the landing pool. Keep going. Data types, safe math, errors, lending pool manager, IA token. Keep going, keep going. And yeah, the Aave is not a simple set of contracts. Lending pool storage, so that would be how the data is stored in the lending pool. Keep going. Lending rate, keep going. Lending pool address provider registry. Just a little bit more. A token, mock A token, lending
Here we go.
pool.sol. There you go. Right. So now you see that it has all these imports. They're all relative imports, which means that they're not going to work if you compare them. But let's scroll down a little bit inside of this file number 52. And if you see some of the code, you have function withdraw, etc., etc. So the simple intuition I'll give you, and you have to imagine that this is a very tedious process, and getting the bytecode is probably easier, but it's going to take me an hour to explain to you how to compile the contracts and compare it. But just get some of this code, just get a random set of few lines. Just copy line 349 to line 358 or something like that. And then you will just copy and you will search in the other code, or you will use an automated tool called Geist. That's what you would actually do. Diff. So you can go, let's actually do that. Let's go on Google and type diff checker. Diff checker. This is a diff tool. Use that one. And then on the left, you will copy the Aave landing pool without the imports at the top, because the imports at the top are going to be different. So let's just get the Aave landing pool. Just copy the entire file and I will show you what happens. But you can copy that. There's going to be differences because of how the imports are coded. And then get the entire inline contract on the right, the phantom one. There's going to be a lot of differences here, but hopefully we can find some similitudes or some similarities so that we actually get something interesting. So let's check for continue. There's probably a button at the bottom. Scroll down a little bit. There's probably continue, diff, whatever. Scroll down in the bigger window. Find difference. And so obviously there's a ton of differences here. You also saw that the code was ported from 6.12 to 7.6. That is a very meaningful change, actually. And that can be a little scary because 6.12 doesn't offer math checks. I believe 7.6 also. But given the versions, there is some thing that is fine. Let's see if we find similarities. Scroll down. But as you can see, we have 3,000 additions, so we have to ignore all of this, which is the extra code that we have to manually copy paste in order to verify. But that's fine. Let's see if we find some of the similarities on the landing pool code, which is the code that we are trying to verify, because that's the logic that it has to do with landing and depositing. Everything else is just the libraries that were imported, which, yes, they could also be tampered with, but for the sake of this conversation, let's keep it simple for a little while. So there you go. You see that there's differences here, right? You have some parameters were deleted. They were not hard-coded, and they were moved. But as you can see, you have landing pool revision. You have OX3 on the left on Aave, and you have landing pool revision 0x2. So that's something that you will probably want to check why it's version 2 instead of version 3. So there may be something there. But then you see a bunch of modifiers. They're the same. Keep scrolling. Let's see if we find anything really scary. Otherwise, they changed the initialize to set new defaults. Really innocuous change, unless the math is really the green on the right. You see initialize and then the green bar, max stable rate borrow size percent. So basically, they just set the 3 extra settings because they couldn't be bothered to set them some other way. Nothing wrong there. Just you would think if there's something weird with those values, but the fact that they have them is fine. Let's see what we got here. They removed one space. Can't fault them for that. It's just one space in formatting. Nothing crazy. Let's continue. Right? You can see that the code is the same. And then we have handle repayment here. So this will be something that has to be considered. Handle repayment. Assuming it's basically a hook that does something. But this will be a meaningful change that would have to be investigated. And because maybe under repayment moves the funds, maybe under repayment change some balance, maybe under repayment doesn't actually repay. There's a million of reasons. Also, A token, you will want to verify where A tokens come from in terms of security, because maybe A tokens actually passed, although it's probably not. But basically, you would want to figure out what's going on there. That's a pretty, that's a sign of something that needs to be further investigated. That's all I'm going to say. Let's continue. Everything else, though, as you can see, it's just liquidation call, some utility there, right? You basically the formatting, can't fault them over changing a space. It's, it is what it is. Let's continue. And so this would basically, the only thing that I will be concerned by is the hook there. Then they have yeah, they brought back the same functions that we had, but they brought them back like this, basically pretending they're constants where they're not, because the contracts are upgradable. So there again, nothing scary here. This is doing nothing. It doesn't move funds. And then there's just some extra formatting stuff, and then they changed the name of the variable there because they basically, as you saw, they wrote it as a variable instead of as a actual constant that is hard coded in the code. But again, that's fine, or at least it looks fine for now. And so that's basically it. Like if you are comfortable with the fact that the A token has an extra hook, you will be comfortable with this lending pool contract. Otherwise, you will also want to verify what the A token contract looks like and why it has the extra hook and what it does. But ultimately, you would have proof at this point that the lending pool is simply receiving the tokens. You can read obviously the code to truly prove that. But if you're familiar with Aave, you will know that the lending pool receives the tokens, processes the borrow, and then it sends the token to the A token, which is the one that grows in your MetaMask balance. And then everything else up there, which may be still tampered with, so you couldn't 100% trust it, but ultimately it's just all the dependencies that allow the programming of that smaller piece of code. So as long as that smaller piece of code wasn't broken, you should also verify the dependencies. But to attack the dependencies, typically is a lot more apparent when you go and check them on GitHub or you look at their source code. And so that will be a glaring vulnerability that shouldn't pass an audit, or at least I hope. But yeah, if you do want to go deeper, you will take the same idea we had and you would apply to the 72 files instead of one. The one file we verified was the most important one because it's the actual logic that is used at that contract, but you would need to technically verify everything else. And if you can compile the contracts locally by downloading their code and then running the compiler, you would be able to skip this entire flow and you would just compile, see what the bytecode is, and compare to the bytecode at that address. And if they match, then the code is the same. And if the code is the same, then you ideally wouldn't be worried because it works. Although, to be extremely specific, if you were to compare the bytecode of the Aave implementation to the bytecode of the Geist implementation, because of this one line, it will be different because there is an extra line here. So the comparison with the bytecode wouldn't work, while the comparison with the diff that we just showed, it is a manual process. It's a pain in the ass, not arguing that. But as you can see, you can actually prove the changes. And if you can prove the changes, you can find the risky stuff.
Got it. So then we would head over to the Discord or ask a dev or something about this A token handler that we were suspicious about.
Yeah, or if you are familiar with the code, you would just go and pick up the any A token implementation, which is in their docs, and you will search for this and or repayment and see what it actually does. So you will go on Geist, the Geist deployment address, the green one, and then you will click on G tokens, scroll down, because they changed them from A tokens to G tokens, but they're the same thing. And then you would pick one at random, the FTM or the WBTC, whatever, and you put it on FTM scan. You still expect keep the diff one we need to not forget, but let's go on FTM scan. You will search for it, remove the space or use the search bar because it formats it for you. And then you will go on contract. It probably is upgradable as well. So again, same idea, read as proxy and then ABI implementation. Yeah. And then once you're there, you got the A token. So now let's get from the diff, the name of the function that was being called. So let's go on the diff, the one on the right, and then copy handle repayment, just the name handle repayment, just the name. Yeah, without the dot. And then, no, without the dot, because the dot is not going to be there, just handle repayment. Then let's go on the FTM, search source code on the top right. There's like a box, yeah. Remove the dot. We can't find it with the dot, press enter. and keep going until you find the actual code for it. This is just the interface. Keep going, press enter. You press enter and you will find it. Yeah, keep going. Or you can use the arrow. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. It does nothing. Okay. So that solves it. Let's go. This one. No, the one with the override. Line 2100. That was the one. Everything else is an interface, but line 2100 is override, which means that it's actually overriding the logic. And it has a modifier, so it's not a virtual function, which means that it's a real function, basically. If you don't see virtual, it means that it's real. If you see override, it means that it's overriding the truth. And so the last one that you see at the bottom of the code is typically the real one, but it may be different based on how the data is presented to you. But ultimately, you see curly braces, close curly braces on line 2100.
So there's
right?
nothing in it.
There's nothing. So it means it's a useless function. They just added it because they thought they could use it in the future. And that's what you really want to see. It means that while the code was changed and it was ported over to 7.6, so there may be some really obscure compiler bug. You cannot exclude that. But ultimately, the code is the same, and the extra line of code does nothing. So it's effectively the same logic. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And obviously, you can criticize the thoroughness of it. You can take it further and continue to do it for every 72 files. I think it could be a great exercise. There's probably a way to automate that. I'm not super aware of, but at the same time, it's a lot better than doing nothing. So I definitely recommend doing this initially, and then over time it basically becomes something that you can do in maybe 20 seconds. So it really becomes something that you can just do really fast, and it's not that impractical. And the second part of the advice is that if you do it in a more logical way, because now we have no aim, right? We're not doing it for any particular goal because we're not depositing. But let's say you were doing it on the actual Geist. Let's go on the website. I'll show you how you would actually verify these contracts more on a more natural way. Is you will be on Geist. Maybe you want to deposit some Phantom. Let's click Phantom. Let's click buttons around. I think you may need to unlock your MetaMask. But let's assume you click deposit here and it asks you for your approval. You're going to get shown the address, and we show you how to derive, to get the source code from the address, right? We showed it on the sushi verification podcast. And so if you can do that, now you're going to verify that specific contract for that specific interaction. And so now what was like a 1,000 or 3,000 lines of code becomes maybe 10, 15 lines of code that you have to actually check. And that's really it. I'm not sure if you can show us the MetaMask, but if you can show there's going to be like a button to open up the address, because now you have the landing pool address or the Geist FTM address. And so you can verify, this will be the WEF gateway. It's another thing that Aave has. It's basically a way to convert the FTM to the WFTM. But basically, you will be able to verify this contract, and then you will see what, based on what you're doing, what it's actually going to do. It's probably like a deposit or lend if. That's probably what you're doing. And so this one is not even upgradable, so you can just go on the code. You see it's upgradable when it has like more boxes, but when all is as free, it means that it's not upgradable. So you can click on code, and you could be able to verify what you're about to do and see that it works. And I think for this contract, because it's not upgradable, because there's basically no difference in how it's built, it probably will be literally like a copy paste, unless Aave also verify their contracts separately, so they have like 50 contracts and you have to copy paste 50 times. But hopefully that gives you the gist of the process that you will be able to go through, and ultimately you can verify this stuff. The information is there, and the more you do it, the less you are speculating, and the more you are verifying that it actually is safe and that it actually works.
All right. So I think we should probably leave it there for today, but I think this has been super valuable. So we've looked at ways that you can check the audits and make sure the audits are from a reputable company. I'm trying to dig out what kind of like a non-technical person but advanced DeFi user would be taking away from this. So like looking at the audits, understanding if the issues identified in the audits were resolved or not, and then understanding what kind of like these base primitive DeFi protocols are, and if they're forks or not of those kind of core protocols. And then we've gone in ways to see if their code is actually 100% the same or not. I think once you get into diagnosing what extra lines are taken out or added in and what is problematic or not problematic, I think that's the point where you need years of experience in this stuff and to be kind of like a security researcher to know how to diagnose those problems or what's serious and what's not serious, right?
Yeah, but at the same time, in having at least the intuition for this process, you basically can trust or not. You can more properly judge whether it is a good idea to trust an audit or trust a security review versus not. And so I feel like we showed what a better security review looks like. I think the first audit the guys got was not an audit at all, while the second one is an actual audit. So I feel like we gave you that. I'm going to give a counter argument to what I said because it's important that you form your own opinion. If you go and check rect.news, and maybe you can go now on rect.news and go on the leaderboard. I mean, you're going to find us as well, but ultimately, you're also going to find a bunch of, let's click on the leaderboard. You're going to find a bunch of auditing firms, right? Some of them are not audited and some of them are audited. And so, in sticking around long enough in this space, you will have an opinion as to which auditing firm is reputable and which is not. Also, because the ones that are not reputable, anytime they audit something that is dangerous, they get it wrong. And so, unfortunately, that's what happens, and you'll see it. And for every blue chip that I mentioned, you'll find that there is a rect for QuantStump and Trade of Bits. So, as you can see, right there, QuantStump, and for anyone that we mentioned, there is a rect. So none is safe from it. You just have to really do your own research and understand why that happened, how that happened, and whether it's truly fault of the auditing firm versus fault of the developer versus fault of myriad of other possibilities. And yeah, you just want to really be safe through knowledge and information. So I feel like this last tidbit of piece is go check Recto News. When I teach upcoming developers how to code, I tell them to go on the leaderboard and read every single entry. And for you, the advanced apes out there, I think you should also read the leaderboard and try to have an intuition for it, and how, and ask yourself how you could have avoided it. If anything, just ask yourself, how do I detect a risk like that, and how do I avoid it? And sometimes it's really just about knowledge, and knowledge will help you a lot.
Well, let me ask you one more question that just sprung up as we were talking about this. Like, are there any practices that you see in DeFi in these large protocols? I know, like, we had a conversation earlier about Cream that kind of gets hacked multiple times. Are there any things that you see as like major issues that are dangerous, but people like haven't learned their lesson and keep doing it anyway?
I think progressive releases are the most undervalued aspect of DeFi, in the sense that, like, even like Uniswap v3 or Solidly, I feel like the main criticism we can have is that they were presented as finished products, when in reality, you can always do better. And so I think we really need to find a better way to have a system of contracts that can change over time, because our opinions and our knowledge changes. And so treating this stuff as finished, I feel like is a big mistake, because you can always do it better. Very few things could have are perfect. Maybe Curve with like for a specific swap at a specific condition is like a finished product. But everything else is not. They always come up with new ideas, and they have a V2 and maybe they'll have a V3, etc. The same goes for Uniswap. The same goes for any product, even Compound. If anything, Compound got wrecked because they tried to change something, which is funny, I guess. Uh, but yeah, I feel like really the biggest thing is progressive releases. So as it goes with time, it becomes safer because nobody was able to exploit it, and that's a pretty decent approximation for actual security. because you have to assume that if it was like the red button that you press it and you steal $1 million or whatever, somebody eventually will just press it, you know. And as such, the biggest security is really is time and peer review. And so if you look at each piece of code, not as finished when it's released, but as finished once it's spent 2 years working and nobody found any fault, any hack, and anything to improve, then now you actually have a safer approach to it, right? Because if you can find a fault and you can improve it, then it's not finished. You need to do a better version. While if it can be hacked, it's not safe, and so it shouldn't be considered finished. And so that I think is a better way of looking at this stuff. It's really just research and development in the real world, and it's not safe until it's spent perhaps 2 years without anything, any criticism and any improvement to be done. And I doubt there's any code in DeFi that we can say that everything, every system, even the oldest one, even DAI, there's always improvements to be found.
All right, Alex, Entreprenerd, thanks so much. And we will look forward to digging into more of this with you next time.
Thank you for having me. Have an awesome one.